What if the wildest cartoons of the 1980s weren't just entertainment, but accidental fortune tellers? Imagine flashy toy commercials wrapped in laser beams and synth music, quietly sketching out the tech you use right now. From drone warfare to exoskeleton suits, these so-called kids' shows often looked suspiciously like blueprints. So, were the animators clairvoyants, or was reality just catching up to imagination? Let's rewind to the Saturday mornings where the future was hiding. Spiral Zone, 1987. Picture this. It's 1987, the Cold War is still rattling nerves, and a dark cartoon slips onto TV that feels less like a toy tie-in and more like a warning. Spiral Zone wasn't cute, it wasn't funny, it was bleak. The story? A villain called Overlord spreads a mind-controlling biological fog across the planet. Whole cities become zombie-like shells of themselves. The only defense? A squad of soldiers in powered exosuits fighting to reclaim the Earth. Think about it for a second. A late 80s kids show predicting mass bioengineered warfare and wearable robotics? That's way beyond Saturday morning fluff. The soldiers' suits weren't just costumes, they were modular exoskeletons that enhanced strength, speed, and weaponry. Today, you can see DARPA and the US military testing eerily similar tech. Swap the cartoon's laser rifles for modern prototypes, and you're staring at reality. The visual style of Spiral Zone didn't hold back either. Characters looked grim, scarred, even haunted. This wasn't the shiny optimism of Transformers. It was dirtier, harsher, and it felt like a future you didn't actually want. That's probably why the series was short-lived. Kids were used to heroes who cracked jokes, not soldiers dealing with despair. Yet the eerie thing is how prophetic it feels now. From engineered pandemics to discussions about how much control machines might have over us, Spiral Zone tapped into fears that didn't fully exist in the mainstream yet. It bombed as a toy line, but left behind one of the most chilling sci-fi scenarios any 80s cartoon ever dared to tackle. Looking back, you realize it wasn't too far from a government think tank's classified report. For a cartoon dismissed as too dark for kids, Spiral Zone might have been the most honest. It didn't predict flying cars or utopias. It warned us about biological weapons and militarized robotics. And that's exactly the road we're on. Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, 1987. Now imagine this. You're sitting cross-legged in front of your TV, and suddenly the cartoon talks back. That was Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future. It wasn't just animation. It was part live action, part cartoon. And it came with toys that actually interacted with the screen. Point your plastic laser gun at the TV, and the show would fire back. That's right. Interactive entertainment decades before Xbox Kinect or VR headsets. The story wasn't much lighter than Spiral Zone. Earth was overrun by machines after a war with an AI called Lord Dread. The survivors fought back in battlesuits, using advanced weapons and high-tech jets. Sound familiar? Because it's basically drone warfare mixed with VR combat training. What made Captain Power legendary wasn't just its gadgets. It was the fact that it dared to tell darker, serialized stories in a medium still dominated by slapstick and one-liners. Characters died. The stakes were real. This wasn't just an ad for toys. It was sci-fi drama disguised as Saturday morning fun. The tech ideas feel straight out of today's headlines. Soldiers fighting with augmented reality targeting? Check. AI systems trying to enslave humanity? Check. Drone armies patrolling the skies? Double check. It was the 80s, but the paranoia felt very 21st century. Even the interactive toy guns were an early experiment in blending media and consumer tech, something that now defines modern gaming. Here's the kicker. Parents hated it. Critics said it was too violent, too scary, and way too ambitious for kids, which, of course, is exactly why it stuck in people's memories. If anything, it showed that children could handle complex, even disturbing narratives. The kids who grew up with Captain Power, they're the adults now living with drone strikes, AI assistance, and the blurred line between reality and simulation. Captain Power wasn't a gimmick. It was a glimpse of interactive futures, where your screen doesn't just entertain you, it fights back. In hindsight, it feels less like a cartoon and more like the beta version of our wired world. M.A.S.K. 1985 to 1986. By the mid-80s, toy companies were basically running Saturday morning, and M.A.S.K., Mobile Armored Strike Command, was one of their boldest ideas. On the surface, it was another good guys versus bad guys adventure. But look closer, and the concept was practically a blueprint for drone warfare and modular combat vehicles. Each car, truck, or motorcycle could transform into a war machine at the flip of a switch. 1 minute, it was a harmless Jeep. The next, it was an armed aircraft raining down missiles. The real hook? Every hero wore a helmet packed with advanced features: tracking systems, radar, communication relays, and specialized weapons. That doesn't sound like a cartoon anymore. It sounds like the helmet cams, HUD displays, and battlefield drones we read about in military journals today. At the time, these gadgets felt futuristic and outlandish. 4 decades later, they're on the shopping list of defense contractors. The show was a strange hybrid, part G.I. Joe, part Transformers. But it quietly tapped into something else: the growing idea that technology wasn't just a tool, but an extension of the soldier. That theme dominates today's discussions about military robotics, from drone pilots in Nevada guiding aircraft in the Middle East, to exoskeleton prototypes designed to make soldiers faster and stronger. M.A.S.K. also mirrored another cultural moment: America's obsession with secrecy. The team worked as a covert strike force, often undercover, echoing Cold War paranoia and shadow warfare. Kids just saw cars with wings. Adults might notice the uncanny resemblance to Black Ops units equipped with classified tech. The show faded after 2 short seasons, but its legacy is hard to ignore. M.A.S.K. didn't just give kids cool toys. It put the idea of drone-style modular warfare in front of millions, long before governments made it standard. Inhumanoids, 1986. If M.A.S.K. hinted at military tech, Inhumanoids screamed something else entirely: environmental disaster. Imagine a Saturday morning cartoon that opened with giant, grotesque monsters clawing their way out of the Earth's crust. That was the premise. The Inhumanoids were ancient, horrific creatures freed by reckless human drilling and greed. Heroes in specialized suits had to contain them before they destroyed the planet. Sound like climate anxiety and ecological collapse in animated form? Exactly. The designs were terrifying, more horror than action. Monsters with skeletal claws, glowing eyes, and toxic breath. Kids tuned in expecting another action show tied to toys. What they got was a nightmare dressed up as science fiction. And here's the uncomfortable part: the themes were dead serious. The Earth striking back against humanity's exploitation of resources? That's today's environmental headline. At the time, critics called it too frightening for kids. Parents complained about nightmares. But peel back the layers, and you realize Inhumanoids was eerily ahead of its time. Rising out of the ground weren't just monsters, but metaphors. The dangers of ripping too much from the Earth, of pushing technology without respect for nature, and of assuming humans could dominate without consequence. In the 1980s, that message sounded far-fetched. In the 21st century, it feels like the news. Visually, it also pushed boundaries. The tone was darker, the fights more brutal, and the stakes were extinction level. It didn't survive long on air, but in hindsight, that might have been because it wasn't escapism. It was a warning dressed as a toy commercial. Inhumanoids failed as a franchise, but succeeded as prophecy. It whispered about climate change before anyone was listening. Maybe that's why it's remembered as one of the strangest, scariest, and most unsettling cartoons of the 80s. Robo Force, 1984. Now, let's shift gears to robots, because in the 80s, everyone was obsessed with machines that thought like people. Robo Force came and went quickly, but its core concept was strangely modern. The show revolved around a team of sentient robots built to protect humanity from an evil machine overlord. Unlike Transformers, these robots weren't aliens. They were human creations, built, programmed, and unleashed on the world. That's where the eeriness kicks in. Think about how much of our present lives revolve around that exact question. What happens when the machines we create become too advanced? Robo Force tackled that in a kids' show. The good robots were loyal and protective. The bad ones had turned against their makers, seeking domination. Strip away the colorful designs, and you've got the same debate raging in 2025 about artificial intelligence, robotics ethics, and the fine line between helper and overlord. The show's designs leaned heavily into chunky mechanical bodies with obvious limitations. But the personalities? They were unmistakably human, jealous, proud, angry, compassionate. In hindsight, that's the scariest part. We've now built AI that mimics those traits, sometimes too well. RoboForce may have looked clunky, but it asked questions that still make tech philosophers squirm. Its failure was partly timing. Kids were already flooded with shinier robot shows, but in its DNA, you can see the same blueprint that now runs through debates about autonomous cars, military drones, and whether robots should have rights. Dismissed as a toy commercial, RoboForce was actually asking, what happens when our creations inherit our flaws? That's not just a cartoon question anymore. That's today's reality. Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light, 1987. If the 80s were obsessed with robots and vehicles, Visionaries was obsessed with the invisible. Imagine a society where advanced technology collapses and humanity reverts to feudalism. The twist? Knights don holographic armor that channels mystical powers. On paper, it sounds bizarre, half medieval, half futuristic. On screen, it was mesmerizing. The real genius was the holograms. Each knight carried a staff, or wore armor with glowing animated holograms representing animals or powers. These weren't just pretty visuals. They predicted the rise of holographic and augmented reality tech decades later. In 1987, the idea of projecting a living, moving hologram was science fiction. In 2025, it's a tech demo at every major conference. Visionaries was also quietly political. Its world was about survival after collapse. Technology gone, resources scarce, society rebuilding through strange new systems of power. That theme hits close to home today, when conversations about resource shortages, tech failures, and the fragility of modern systems are louder than ever. The Knight's holographic abilities became metaphors for knowledge, adaptability, and even control of information. Doesn't that sound like our battles with data, AI, and digital dominance now? The show struggled in ratings. Kids loved robots and cars. Holographic knights felt niche, maybe even confusing. Yet the imagery has aged better than most of its peers. The holograms weren't just gimmicks. They were windows into a tech-driven future that we're still trying to master. Visionaries only lasted one season, but its holographic obsessions echo loudly today. What once looked like flashy fantasy is now the foundation of augmented reality. If anything, it wasn't too weird. It was too early. Silverhawks, 1986. Shiny metal suits, half-human bodies, and a promise of justice in deep space. Silverhawks was basically a cyberpunk fever dream for kids. The premise? A team of heroes with metallic bodies, surgically enhanced to survive in space, fighting an intergalactic mob boss named Mon-Star. At first glance, it looks like flashy action with a rockin' theme song. But underneath the chrome, it was whispering about something much bigger, transhumanism. The characters weren't just armored, they were part machine, their human weaknesses replaced with cybernetic implants. They flew without ships, their wings part of their bodies, their eyes upgraded for cosmic combat. Sound extreme? It's basically the blueprint for modern cybernetics, prosthetics, and debates about how much of your body can be replaced before you stop being human. The tone was lighter than Spiral Zone or Inhumanoids, but the implications were heavy. At a time when computers were just starting to creep into daily life, Silverhawks presented a future where flesh and metal weren't separate. They were fused. Flash forward, and you'll find tech companies showing off brain-computer interfaces, artificial limbs controlled by thought, and even prosthetics stronger than the originals. What's wild is how Silverhawks wrapped these ideas in pure spectacle. Space guitar solos, laser battles, and villains who looked like heavy metal album covers. Kids loved the action. Adults looking back see a strange kind of prophecy. By blending biology with machinery, the show reflected a growing fear and fascination that technology wouldn't just serve us, it would become us. Silverhawks didn't just soar through space, it soared into one of the deepest questions of the 21st century. How far will we go to merge with machines? The cartoon gave a flashy answer in 1986. We're still wrestling with the real one today. Centurions 1986. Power extreme. If you grew up in the 80s, that phrase still echoes. Centurions was the show that turned modular combat into a catchphrase. The story was simple. 3 heroes wore exosuits that allowed weapons and vehicles to lock directly onto their bodies. One was specialized in land, one in sea, one in air. Together, they became walking, living arsenals. Strip away the neon colors and catchphrases, and what you've got is the early vision of military exoskeletons, machines designed to amplify a soldier's body. In the 80s, it looked like fantasy. In 2025, it looks like DARPA testing powered suits that let humans carry hundreds of pounds, run longer, and fight harder. Centurions didn't just predict wearable tech. It predicted modularity, the idea that a single platform could swap attachments depending on the mission. That's exactly how militaries now think about drones, vehicles, and even soldier gear. The villains were equally telling. Doc Terror and Hacker weren't just bad guys. They were cybernetic monstrosities, human-machine hybrids whose upgrades stripped away humanity. Again, that's today's fear, that while we build machines to enhance us, we might lose something essential along the way. On TV, it looked like action figures smashing together. In hindsight, it's one of the clearest cases of cartoons foreshadowing real-world tech. The phrase man and machine, power extreme, sounds like a marketing slogan. Now it reads like a Pentagon white paper. Centurions was dismissed as another toy commercial, but in reality, it nailed the future of modular robotics and wearable combat systems. Today's engineers probably wish they had trademarked the catchphrase, Defenders of the Earth, 1986. This one pulled heroes out of newspaper strips, Flash Gordon, the Phantom, Mandrake the Magician, and dropped them into a future tech battleground. Defenders of the Earth wasn't just nostalgia, it was a forward-looking mashup where classic pulp icons fought an alien tyrant using satellites, AI-driven computers, and global surveillance. Sound familiar? Because we live in that world now. The team's greatest weapon wasn't just brawn or magic, it was their supercomputer, a central AI system that monitored Earth, coordinated attacks, and even interacted like a personality. In 1986, an all-knowing computer felt like fantasy. In 2025, it sounds like Siri, Alexa, or the AI, quietly processing data for defense agencies. The show also leaned heavily on satellites, beaming signals, tracking threats, and serving as the backbone of planetary defense. Today, militaries actually build constellations of satellites for surveillance and missile defense, eerily close to what Defenders of the Earth casually showed on the weekday afternoons. Even the family dynamics were futuristic. The kids of these legendary heroes weren't just sidekicks. They were inheritors of a world where technology and tradition had to merge. That idea of passing the torch while adapting to a digital age still resonates. The show was overshadowed by bigger franchises and didn't last long, but the concepts it tossed around were ahead of the curve. Watching it now feels less like retro adventure and more like a soft demo for AI-driven security states. Defenders of the Earth sold itself as pulpy heroics, but it predicted the rise of AI computers and satellite-based surveillance. If you think about it, the villains didn't lose. Their world just became ours. The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers, 1986. If you thought cowboys in space were just a gimmick, Galaxy Rangers proved it could be so much more. This was a space western with teeth, a show that gave lawmen cybernetic implants and sent them across the galaxy to keep order. The result? A mix of frontier grit and hard sci-fi speculation that ended up predicting the biotech debates we're living through right now. Each Ranger had enhancements that pushed the human body beyond its natural limits. One had augmented strength, another had advanced computer interfaces wired directly into his nervous system. while another could manipulate energy fields. That's cybernetics, body augmentation, and human-machine integration. All ideas that are no longer science fiction, but medical research and military prototypes. What made Galaxy Rangers stand out was its tone. Unlike many 80s cartoons, it wasn't built to sell mountains of toys. It leaned on serialized storytelling, darker themes, and genuine stakes. Characters could fail. They could even die. For kids used to endless cartoon resets, that was a shock, and a sign this show wasn't afraid to treat its audience seriously. Looking back, the mix of Western imagery and sci-fi technology feels prophetic. The Rangers were basically early versions of cyborg police officers, blurring the line between protector and experiment. Today, we're asking the same questions. If a soldier or officer is enhanced with implants or AI, are they still just human or something new entirely? Galaxy Rangers didn't just fire laser pistols. It fired a warning shot about how far we'd go in rewriting the human body for technology's sake. What seemed like space opera in 1986 looks uncomfortably close to reality in 2025. Pole Position, 1984. At first glance, Pole Position looked like a cartoon trying to cash in on car culture. Fast cars, stunts, danger. It had the trappings of a racing adventure. But peel back the hood and you'll find something much stranger. A preview of self-driving vehicles and AI co-pilots. The two main cars, Rhodey and Wheels, weren't just machines. They were artificially intelligent partners, equipped with sensors, data processing, and personalities. Think about how wild that was for 1984. A Saturday morning cartoon essentially predicting Siri with wheels, decades before Tesla or Google started showing off autonomous cars. These vehicles communicated, advised, and sometimes even argued with their human drivers. It wasn't just cool, it was predictive programming of what smart vehicles would eventually become. The series was short-lived, but the imagery stuck. Cars leaping over canyons while their AI co-pilots calculated probabilities in real time. Families using vehicles as mobile command centers. High-tech cars serving not just as transportation, but as companions. If you've ever yelled at your GPS or thanked your car's lane assist system, you've already lived the pole position dream. What doomed the show was its balance. It didn't lean hard enough into racing, and it didn't quite hit the toy craze like Transformers. But its futuristic vision was years ahead of its time. Watching it now feels like a beta version of our smart cars, complete with built-in personalities. Pole Position wasn't just another racing cartoon. It was a roadmap for the AI-driven vehicles cruising the highways today. Turns out the cars in your garage are a lot closer to Saturday morning fantasies than you'd think. COPS, Central Organization of Police Specialists, 1988. By the late 80s, toy companies were desperate for fresh angles, and COPS delivered with a futuristic spin on law enforcement. Set in the year 2020, yes, really, the show imagined police using robotic gear, exosuits, and high-tech gadgets to fight crime. It looked like fun and games then. Today, it feels uncomfortably real. The characters were larger than life. Longarm with his extendable cybernetic arm, M.A.S.K with his high-powered tech gear, and a rogues gallery of criminals who felt more like cyberpunk gangsters than cartoon clowns. But beneath the flashy designs, the show raised a chillingly modern idea. Police forces enhanced by technology beyond what civilians could imagine. Remember, this was 1988. Police drones weren't real. Body cams didn't exist. Exoskeletons were science fiction. Yet cops threw it all on screen as if it were inevitable. And here we are, decades later, with departments using surveillance drones, robotic dogs, and wearable tech, straight out of the show's design Bible. Of course, cops never dove into the social questions those ideas raise. It was marketed as fun adventure, with heroes always catching the bad guys. But from a modern lens, it's uncanny. The uniforms, the tech, the gadgetry. It's basically a forecast of 21st century law enforcement. Like so many on this list, the series was short-lived but stuck in memory, because it looked a little too much like tomorrow. Cops wasn't just kids' entertainment. It was an eerie prelude to the debates we're having now about surveillance, robotics, and the future of policing. Sometimes the future sneaks in wearing a badge and a toy tie-in. So, there you have it. 12 lost cartoons that weren't just playtime, they were prophecies. These forgotten shows didn't predict utopias. They predicted drones, AI cars, exosuits, holograms, and even climate collapse. Makes you wonder, were the writers just guessing, or did the future leak into Saturday mornings? Drop your favorite in the comments, hit subscribe if you love uncovering these buried gems, and remember, sometimes the craziest cartoons end up telling the truest stories.